I would like to now introduce to you Mr. Joel VanEaton. Joel has over 20 years as a long-term care professional. He has proven in his many years of experience to have the ability to direct complex projects from concept to fully operational status, demonstration of strong leadership capabilities, and a detailed, direct problem solver. Joel's many accomplishments include, but are not limited to, development and implementation of educational resources related to Medicare regulatory environment, MDS 3.0 and other clinical reimbursement processes for nursing facilities in Tennessee, Kentucky, California, Georgia, Maine, New York, North Carolina, and South Carolina. He has developed PDPM and MDS 3.0 educational programs and materials for Broad River Rehab and the Georgia Healthcare Association. Mr. VanEaton continues to be a contributor to ANAC, Long-Term Care Leader, and McKnight's Long-Term Care News. Joel currently continues his passion of overseeing education for clients and facility staff related to reimbursement systems, including federal and state regulatory compliance. As the Executive Vice President of PAC Regulatory Affairs and Education at Broad River Rehab, which is based here locally for me in East Tennessee, really close, Nashville, North Carolina. Again, Joel has extreme amount of experience being RAC CTA Master Teacher. Again, he's the Executive Vice President of PAC Regulatory Affairs and Education with Broad River Rehab. You're able to access his information and topics that they have provided underneath broadriverrehab.com. Joel, do you want to take it away now?
Well, thank you again so much. I appreciate that introduction. It's always humbling to hear some of the things that I've had the privilege of being involved with over the years and bringing that to the table to Broad River Rehab here, thinking through some of the people that have been a significant influence in my life, and just it's a wonderful time of the year to be sort of reminiscing and thinking about those kinds of things. And hearing all of that you just said, Amanda, kind of brings that all to mind. And so it's a wonderful thing to think about that and to be thankful for the opportunities that we have here in this industry. And I really appreciate the opportunity to bring this information to QSource. I think being able to talk about these kinds of things within the construct and the context of QSource, I think is tremendously helpful. And the work that they're doing to help facilities increase quality of care is monumental. And so I count it a privilege to be able to have the opportunity to share alongside QSource today. We're going to spend some time talking today about the quality measure changes. And we've titled our presentation today, Significant Change in Status, the Updates to the Quality Measure, Staffing in 5-Star Without Section G. So we've been a bit lucky, if you will, in the state of Tennessee, as the transition has occurred now for Medicaid purposes to PDPM starting September 1st. And so Q4 and Q1 PDPM data from our minimum data sets will attribute to our July rate. And I mention that because a number of states around us here don't have that luxury. The states of North Carolina, for instance, Virginia, and Ohio, for instance, all have not made the change to PDPM. And so in their completing of the minimum data set, they're going to be required in many cases to complete not only the federally required assessments, but also the state-specific or the optional state assessments in order to calculate their case mix indexes for reimbursement for the next couple of years. We, on the other hand, are not going to have to do that, and so we're very fortunate in this state that we are locked into Section GG now, and will not have to consider Section G in relationship to ADLs and functional status. And that takes us to the topic of conversation today, because as we've moved forward away from use of Section G, certainly in the federally required assessment, Section G is gone. and as that attributes to our state Medicaid as well, Section GG will be the only functional status that will attribute to both our federal and our state reimbursement. The other big change in relationship to Section G changes, aside from the reimbursement, does have to do with the quality measures and staffing and 5-star. And so there's quite a bit of change that's coming our way in relationship to how the quality measure structures have changed and are going to change over the next couple of years in relationship to the fact that Section G is gone now and Section GG will be the way that these quality measures are tabulated. So that's our topic of conversation today, is to think through the changes that are getting ready to happen and that are happening currently, and then how we can use that information for quality in our facilities. So we want to understand a couple of things about this change. CMS issued a memo. We'll mention that memo and link to that here in just a minute, and indicated specifically the changes that will occur related to the Section G to GG transition. First of all, the 672 survey form has radically undergone a change. We'll talk about that and where we should be in relationship to that. We have also updates to the quality measure specifications. We'll run through those today as well, recognize the staffing calculation revisions, and then think about the effect on the 5-star ratings moving forward. A couple of things that I always like to do when I present is to provide a resource page. And so since we're limited today to the updates to the quality measures and staffing and 5-star related to G going away and GG coming in and replacing that in the quality measures, we have just a few resources to share with you. The memo that you see there, QSO 2321NH, is the memo that CMS published or posted back in September, on September 20th, to let us know the significant changes that were getting ready to occur and the timelines associated with those. They also issued a couple of memos to us, those of you that may be involved in or have a link or have signed up for the listservs from CMS. I would encourage you to do that if you haven't done that. And one of those listservs sends out routine announcements related to these kinds of changes. And so there was some other information they released in addition to that QSO form. It came in an email format, so I couldn't link to that on this form here on this resource page. Also, a copy of the 672 form. We got a link there. We'll look at that, see the changes that have occurred to that, and what we should expect in relationship to how surveyors should be utilizing that information and what should be done with that on your next survey. The SNF Quality Reporting Program is also a very important website to be involved with, as well as the SNF Value-Based Purchasing website. I didn't link the value-based purchasing. Our conversation today will be limited in relationship to QRP and VBP. Those are whole other conversations that we may be able to have at a future date with you all here at QSource. But these are two sort of sister programs, if you will, to the quality measure reporting program in 5-star that includes some similar measures now too that we're going to find in the programs that we're talking about today. The SNF quality measures are on that web page there, SNF QM web page there, the quality measures. A new quality measure users manual version 16 is what's out there now to be accessed and utilized in terms of understanding the new quality measures. And that a lot of that is what we're going to be utilizing today in terms of the differences between the quality measures currently and what they will be under the new system with just GG being utilized to calculate them. And then the 5-star rating system, of course, is going to be changing and updating related to these changes, and we'll mention that and the timeline involved in that and what to expect related to the changes there. All of this, of course, as we talk about quality measures, we have to remember and understand the original intent of quality measures from CMS's perspective. I've been around in this industry, I don't know, 20 plus years now. And when I began in the industry, the quality measures were called quality indicators. Some of you all have been around that long to remember that. And initially, the quality indicators were developed as a way to do two things. First of all, they were a process that we could extract data out of the minimum data set like they do currently, to calculate quality measures that could be used then for internal quality improvement processes. And that's still really their fundamental purpose. Even though they have moved out into a 5-star rating system, into a quality reporting system, and a value-based purchasing system, the fundamental use and reason for quality measure development is to help facilities understand their own internal quality issues and work to advance quality in their facilities. And so that's the whole point of what we're talking about in terms of the quality measures. And we should always be thinking of them that way, that they're not punitive, that they're things that we should be looking at very specifically in relationship to helping us to advance quality in our facilities. So let's start and talk, first of all, with the change from G to GG had a significant impact on the 672 form. The 672 form, of course, is the form that gets filled out when surveyors show up in your facility. This is the form itself that is familiar to most of you, I'm sure. I've seen this, and I've highlighted some areas on this form. We didn't actually send this out to you as a handout. Most of you are familiar with what it is, but we'll reference it today in relationship to the changes that have occurred to it and what CMS is expecting in relationship to that form now. The resident and census and condition form, the changes to the minimum data set from G to GG, now G being gone, necessitate changes to the form that you are so familiar with now when survey shows up in your building. So specifically what has changed in relationship to this form is fields that can no longer be completed due to the removal of section G, which is mainly the whole form, all right, most of the form. So surveyors no longer use these MDS-based fields in the 672 form as part of the survey process. And so effective September 29, so this should already be in the past. I did this presentation with one of our customers the other day and found out that the surveyors were still asking for this form when they showed up in the facility. So just be aware, the memo that we linked on the first slide there with the resources indicates this. And if the surveyors have questions about it, you can access that memo and refer them to that memo from CMS. But effective September 29, facilities are no longer required to complete these fields, all right, F79 to F145, and surveyors are no longer required to enter this information in fields F79 to F93. So when we look at the form here, you can see F79 to F93. Those are the forms. Those are the pieces of the form that are no longer necessary for the surveyors to complete, all right? And then F79 to F145, facilities are no longer required to complete, and that's some overlap there, and that goes all the way down here to the very bottom of the form. So all of this that's not highlighted on here is no longer required based on that memo and based on the changes from section G to GG. The census information fields F75 to F78 and the ombudsman information fields 146 to 147 and the medication error rate 148 should still be completed on this form. And so you can see I've highlighted those areas here, the census information and then the ombudsman information, medication error rate. Those are the only items that are still required in relationship to the items that were on this form previously. But the point here is that at least in the memo on October 22nd, the census medication error rate and ombudsman information fields are supposed to have been relocated to the Form 671 long-term care facility application for Medicare and Medicaid, and the CMS 672 form rather will be removed. Now, as I mentioned, I was at a facility in North Carolina actually late last week doing this presentation as well. And they indicated that surveyors were still asking for this 672 form. So it may be that the full transition to the 671 form has not occurred. Just keep in mind what the memo has said and being able to have that access to that memo to say there are certain items we're no longer required to complete. The only items we're required to provide now in terms of the 672 information are the census information, ombudsman information, and medication error rate information on that form. So hopefully that's helpful. I know that form, I remember in the days when I was involved very specifically with facility work and helping facilities through survey processes on a mock survey team and working in facilities. Having to complete this form was a challenge. Having to keep it up on a regular basis to have it available to the surveyors when they showed up certainly was a time-consuming effort. And so it's definitely something that will be a relief in relationship to all of that information that will no longer be required. So just keep that in mind, back of your pocket. That is something that has changed now in relationship to the Section G to GG transition. Another change that's happened is adjustments to staffing on the 5-star rating system. So we want to pay attention to what these are and why this is happening. Today, we don't have time to go through an entire discussion relative to the staffing portion of your 5-star rating. I wish we did. It would help in the context of the conversation here today, but just some of the basic things. Currently, the CMS adjusts your staffing measure using case mix methodology that's based on items from the previous Medicare prospective payment system, RUG 66. Pardon me, that never changed in relationship to the data that started to be captured on October 1st, 2019 with the implementation of PDPM. Was always a question that I had and many others folks in the industry had in relationship to why they didn't change this back when PDPM came along. In the questions that we always had were the fact that the RUG 66 system was not generating a RUG 66 RUG score anymore, at least that we could see. And we were constantly questioning why they weren't changing that over. Well, that has changed over now because Section G is gone. So G was there up until the new MDS that just came about in October 1st this year, version 1.18.11. And for those of you that are interested, that's version 6. If you go out to the CMS MDS 3.0 website, they've updated that data set 6 times since they started posting that earlier this year for us to get used to. So version 6 of that data set is out there, and that's the one you should be accessing if you're looking to download that kind of information from the MDS 3.0 website. And so because Section G is gone now, the RUG 66 grouper, from the federal perspective, at least from the information that's being gathered on the federal required assessments, can no longer be calculated. And so the items that were used to calculate the case mix or adjusted the expected case mix hours in that calculation for 5-star cannot come from RUG 66 anymore. The other point is that CMS also used some of these MDS items to risk adjust some of the quality measures, which we'll talk about today. But in October 23, again, as we said, G is gone now, and that necessitates a change to the staffing case mix method that currently uses Section G items. So just a little bit of the basics on how your expected numbers are utilized in terms of understanding what your staffing numbers are. We'll look at that on the next slide. But CMS is changing because Section G is gone and Section GG is coming into the picture now. CMS has to change the way the staffing case mix adjustment methodology is utilized, and they're going to have to use or are now using the SNF payment-driven payment model acuity indexes from the nursing category or case mix indexes in order to accomplish that same task that was used from RUG 66 before. And so that's a big change because those case mix indexes are completely different. They measure different things. They still incorporate staff time inside those case mix indexes. The STRIVE study was used partially to help develop those as well. But the fact is they are case mix specific to PDPM now. And so an adjustment to your staffing in terms of acuity will have to be made based on the patient-driven payment model. So beginning in April 2024, CMS will freeze the staffing measures for 3 months while they make this transition. All right. And in July 2024, CMS will post nursing home staffing measures based on the new PDPM methodology. So that transition is getting ready to take place, and there will be a freeze on the staffing in April 2024 for 3 months. And in July 2024, CMS will post the nursing home staffing measures based on the new PDPM methodology. And so essentially, just a note again on an explanation a bit about how your expected numbers occur. The minimum data set is used for a couple of things in terms of your staffing numbers for your 5-star rating, just so that you're aware of that. Your census comes from the MDS, and so in order to get a staffing ratio per patient per day ratio for the staffing measures, RN staffing, total staffing, and then total staffing on the weekends, those three measures, in order to get those ratios, nurse to staff ratios or caregiver to staff ratio, there has to be a census, and that comes from the MDS. The other thing that comes from the MDS is the acuity. And so those staffing numbers are adjusted based on the acuity that's reported on the MDS from PDPM and the case mix groups from the nursing category currently. So that's important to understand that the MDS, the accuracy of the MDS, timely completion and submission of the MDS are critical to an accurate representation of your staffing in the 5-star rating system. And so just a note on that, that change is occurring now. And starting in July of 2024, then we will have staffing numbers that are being utilized relative to the PDPM construct rather than RUG 66. The 5-star users guide, by the way, which I linked on that slide as well. Did I link that on that slide? I didn't link that on. Yes. The SNF 5-star users guide was linked also on slide 3. Has been revised to accommodate this change that's getting ready to occur, with an addendum at the end of the page to indicate the change, how it's going to work, what the classification system that will be utilized to do it, the case mix indexes, the categories, and the calculation change, pardon me, in relationship to how that will work. So if you're interested in reading more about that and understanding more about that particular piece of it, I would encourage you to grab a hold of that. Pardon me, grab a hold of that document that's linked on slide 3 and read more about that in the appendix they've added. And then in July, we'll have a new 5-star user's guide that will incorporate those changes into the main text of that document, and moving forward as to how staffing numbers will be calculated. A couple of other things just to pay attention to and to note about the changes that will occur to staffing stars related to this memo that we mentioned just a few minutes ago. To minimize the potential disruption associated with the implementation of the new case mix adjustment methodology, CMS will revise the staffing rating thresholds to maintain the same overall distribution of points for affected staffing members. And we'll look at that in just a minute here so you can understand what we're talking about that there in terms of the changes that will occur related to PDPM and the case mix indexes and so forth. And scoring methodology will have to adjust once those new numbers are tabulated and calculated. There will need to be essentially new thresholds in order to get certain points associated with your staffing, your adjusted staffing number. So we'll look at that table just in a minute and get a sense for how that will work. Also, it's important to know too currently that the nursing homes that fail to submit staffing data or submit erroneous data for staffing levels receive a 1-star staffing rating for the quarter in which the data are reported. But up until this point, until this change occurs, nursing homes that fail to submit data in order to calculate the staff turnover have their turnover measure excluded from the staffing rating calculation, and so there's no impact to their score. So from the time that the change occurred related to adding the turnover measures to your staffing star calculation, if a facility did not turn in information related to the turnover, one of the 3 turnover measures, RN turnover, total staff turnover, and administrator turnover, the 3 measures that are measured for turnover, then there is a rescoring mechanism built into the calculation that discounts or excludes that from the calculation, and then it calculates based on data that's available. So there's no impact to the score. So that's important to know that that's sort of been a give me to us really since that happened. And many facilities that didn't report data still had good turnover measures compared to facilities that turned in all of their turnover data. So posting accurate and complete staffing data is important. Of course, the publicly reported data is meant to be transparent so that folks in the community can look at that 5-star rating and look at the data that's submitted out there in order to be able to make decisions about where they want to place their loved ones. And so that data needs to be available. So it's important to understand from this memo's perspective that to further incentivize facilities to submit accurate staffing data, i.e. transfer data, data for turnover rather, um, accurate data related to turnover, and to submit all of that data for turnover. Beginning in April 2024, CMS will revise the staffing rating methodology so providers that fail to submit staffing data or submit erroneous data receive the lowest score possible for corresponding staff turnover measures. And that's important to understand. As it stands right now, it doesn't affect your staff turnover measures and your staffing TAR if you don't turn in your turnover measure data. It will starting in April 2024. So that's important to remember as well. Getting that lowest score will have a negative impact on your star rating. So I want to just take a look real quick here at the case mix adjustment to staffing so that you can kind of get a sense. And I mentioned this just a few minutes ago that we'd look more specifically at how that works. The adjustment to your reported staffing ratios for case mix now use or will use with this new transition the nursing case mix groups and the corresponding 25 nurse case mix indexes that are derived from the patient-driven payment model. And I mentioned a minute ago the updated manual 5-star users guide has been updated to include this there now in that addendum to help us understand how that will affect your case mix adjusted ratios moving forward. Again, the case mix hours or expected hours are based on the distribution of nursing case mix groups within each facility, PDPM nursing case mix intergroups, and the reported national average staffing level. All of that information used together to formulate what's called an adjusted hours number. And CMS calculates the case mix adjusted hours per resident per day for each facility using this formula here. And this is the formula that's been in place for forever. And it's still going to be the formula that's used. There's a bit, some nuances associated with it in that addendum. But basically what happens is there's an adjusted hours number that then is put into one of the comparison groups. You'll see here in just a minute. One of the comparison groups to give you a certain number of points associated with that set of data that you've reported that is adjusted then by the census and the case mix that comes out of the MDS. That's the calculation that you see there. Hours reported divided by the hours case mix. The hours case mix adjustment happens based on the case mix data that reports out of the minimum data set. That calculation, hours reported from PBJ divided by hours adjusted by case mix, multiplied by the national average of adjusted hours, case mix adjusted hours, gives the facility an adjusted number then that can be an apples to apples comparison to the rest of the nation. All right. And so basically what happens is the national average hours for a given staff type represent the national mean of case mix hours across all facilities. So those three portions of that calculation, the reported hours reported to PBJ, case mix values for each nursing home based on the daily distribution of patients by PDPM nursing case mix in the quarter covered by that PBJ data, and then the national hours for a given staff type represent the national mean of the case mix hours across all facilities. That's the calculation that's utilized to give us that case mix adjusted staffing ratio to be compared. Right now, this is a piece of the table that comes out of the 5-star users guide. And basically, I just wanted to show you here what happens. And these are the staffing hours. This is not the turnover hours. There's another table that shows the 3 turnover hours as well. Essentially works in the similar way in terms of gaining points. But what we have here, you'll notice that for adjusted RN staffing hours, and that adjusted RN staffing hours is the adjusted number based on that calculation we looked at just a minute ago. Same for total nurse staffing hours, and these two are for the entire 7 days period of time. And then there's a weekend staffing adjustment as well. You'll notice that you have point values for the adjusted staffing for the total 7 days broken down into deciles in 10-point increments. All right. So depending on what that adjusted number is, based on the calculation we looked at a few minutes ago, you can get anywhere from 10 to 100 points associated with that particular staffing measure. One of the things that's really helpful about this too is when you have an opportunity to download your 5-star preview report that comes from your iKeys system now, you can break this down into its component parts and understand why your points are the way that they are. It's a really helpful exercise to see that in terms of making sure your data that's reporting through PBJ and through your MDS are accurate in terms of the number that shows up here. And then for your weekend hours, they're also deciles broken into 10-point increments, but it's only from 5 to 50. All right, 5-point increments here, but there are 10 essentially divided increments here. So depending on the number of points that you get, or the number of your adjusted number that you get based on the calculation we looked at just a minute ago, then you receive anywhere from 5 to 50 points here. When we get to the turnover measures, there are tables that are similar to these in terms of point values and minimum and maximum hours there for your turnover measures, a percentage of turnover. And there's another section of that 5-star user's guide that documents and talks about how the 5-star turnover measures are calculated as well. And again, that could be a whole nother discussion in terms of how we get to the turnover measure and how that actually works and the timeframes involved with that. But needless to say, what happens is whatever points you gain then associated with your adjusted staffing hours and your turnover hours, wherever that falls in the point or the range here related to your staffing hours per resident per day, or if we were looking at turnover, your percentage of turnover, you get the associated number of points with that. Once you have the total number of points associated with those, there is a maximum of 380 points that you can gain. But again, they're divided into 5 increments here, 1-star through 5-star for your staffing. And basically the star you achieve related to your staffing is a representation of the points that you gain based on your staffing, adjusted staffing numbers per patient per day, and your turnover numbers. So you can see the increments there. Anything 155 points or less, you're a 1-star facility. 2 stars, 155 to 204, and so forth. 5 stars, 320 to 380. All right. And so thinking about how your case mix adjustments to staffing work, bottom line is the better your staffing represents against the case mix that you have or the acuity you have in your facility, the more points you're actually going to attain, in particular related to these adjusted staffing numbers. So I want to point that out today, that the rubber meets the road really in terms of this G to GG transition, as we've talked about the 672 form, radically changed now in the information that's required there, and now also the staffing number in relationship to your 5-star rating, very significantly impacted now by that G to GG transition. And a word just as we think about that and as we move forward then into the quality measures, it's important for you to understand how important it is for accuracy in relationship to section GG. Section GG is an extremely critical piece of information to be completing as it relates to everything that the MDS represents. Ultimately, all of the areas that then come out of the MDS. Initially, as we said before, the quality indicators, quality measures now, also reimbursement, the care area assessments and care plans, quality measures, quality reporting, value-based purchasing, all of these now being affected significantly by Section GG. So the point I want to make about that is that as we think about how Section GG is representing quality in our facilities from a staffing perspective, from how we represent our residents to the surveyors, from how the quality measures are changing now that we're going to talk about. Our processes for completing Section GG in our facilities needs to be airtight. It needs to be a system that everybody agrees works whoever's completing that information, and then who are the qualified staff that can actually take that information and make an analysis on what is usual performance or usual functioning over those time periods, those 3-day windows of time for the various kinds of assessments. All of that process in your facility is something that we really need to pay close attention to now that that transition is made from G to GG. GG is the thing that will represent your facility in all of these areas very significantly and have a significant impact, not only on your reimbursement, how your care plans are formed, how your quality measures look, what your 5-star looks like, how your reporting looks like in quality reporting. And as we get to value-based purchasing, goodness, a whole lot more we could talk about at value-based purchasing, but there will be pieces of that value-based purchasing program now that will be impacted by how you code section GG. So it's important that we pay attention to that, and that section GG is an accurate reflection, an accurate representation of the usual performance of the residents that are in our facilities. And as I mentioned before, now in Tennessee in particular, as that relates to your PDPM case mix index that will be utilized now to adjust your rate, your Medicaid payment rate starting July 1st of 2024. Again, just to remind you all, that case mix number that will represent in your rate for July of 2024 will be representative of quarter 4 and quarter 1, September, October, November, December, January, February, and that information started to be collected in September. So we're already September, October, November, a quarter and almost a month into case mix indexes that will affect your July rate based on PDPM and significantly impacted by section GG. A note as well, and this isn't our topic of conversation today, but just for this is a freebie here. Your resident shadow rosters have been posted. So if you haven't looked at those at your facilities yet, please do that. That will give you a sense for where your case mix is headed. And doing some analysis there will help you understand where your opportunities are in relationship to accessing that information and being sure that you are accurately represented in your case mix index when it comes to how they will utilize that then to decide to calculate that portion of your rate come July 2024. All right, let's move then into the quality measure changes, and this will be the bulk of our topic of conversation today. Really what I'd like to do is help you understand the changes that have occurred, and once again back to the accuracy piece from the minimum data set and how it represents in the quality measures is critically important, again, because these quality measures not only impact your IKEYS facility-specific reports now that you can look at, that surveyors look at, it also impacts your 5-star in many ways, quality reporting program and the value-based purchasing program as well. So the removal of section G has implications for 5 quality measures. 4 of which were used are used currently in the nursing home 5-star rating system. We're going to look at each one of these here so you can see the changes that have occurred. The quality measures impacted by this transition. First of all, the percentage of residents who made improvement in function. That's a short stay measure. The percentage of residents whose need for help with activities of daily living has increased. That's a long stay measure. Percentage of residents whose ability to move independently worsened. That is a long stay measure. Percent of high-risk residents with pressure ulcers, a long stay measure. Those first 4 that we looked at there impact your 5-star rating currently. And then the last one does not impact your 5-star, but it does show up on your Casper report. It's not the Casper report. I keep calling it Casper. It's like the translation to GG now. Can't use G anymore. It's GG. The percentage of low-risk residents who lose control of their bowel or bladder, and that's a long stay measure as well. And that does not affect your 5-star, but it is on your IKEYS facility-specific report, resident-specific reports that have replaced the Casper reports that we were used to downloading out of Keys before. All right, and here's how this will work again in this transition. We need to be aware of this. You're going to see the changes specifically here in just a minute. Starting in April 2024, CMS will freeze or hold constant the 5-star measures on the nursing home compare. So the first 4 measures there will be held constant on the nursing home compare starting April 2024. All right, so just a few short months away. Springtime. I can't wait for springtime. I'm not a winter guy. I tolerate it, but I'm looking forward to spring. I always love this time of year because we're getting very close to the winter equinox, which means on the 21st of December, we start tilting back towards the sun, and springtime and summer on the axis. The axis doesn't tilt, but the annual revolution around the sun takes us to where the northern hemisphere will be facing the sun closer, and our spring summer seasons will happen there. One of my favorite songs, Christmas songs, actually, was by James Taylor, and it's "Here Comes the Sun." And I always play that song around this time of year because it helps me understand that we're going to start seeing longer days again starting on the 21st of December. Anyway, a side note there. So just a few months there into the spring of April 2024. And then in October, so next fall, CMS will replace the short stay functionality quality measure, the first one in the list there, the first bullet point, under the quality measures there, the short stay functionality quality measure, with a new cross-setting functionality quality measure, which is used in the SNF quality reporting program and value-based purchasing. I should have added that as part of that bullet point there. And that is going to be a discharge function score, which we'll look at here shortly. So the remaining three measures: percent of residents whose need for help with daily activities has increased, percent of residents whose ability to move independently worsened, and percent of residents with pressure ulcers will continue to be frozen or held constant until January 2025, while the data for equivalent measures are collected. So again, there has to be a full 4 quarters for that to happen. And as we move forward with that information, then in January 2025, it'll be January or April. It isn't clear at this point. I think it'd probably be April, which will be full four quarters of 2024. That will attribute then to the update in April of 2025. So we'll see how that works more specifically. They could update it in January, and so they may do that because that will be then quarter 4 through quarter 3 of quarter 4 of 2023, quarter 1, 2, and 3 of 2024. That would give us an update in January. So we'll see what happens. But somewhere around that time, then once that data is fully collected, we'll have 4 quarters of data to see those 3 quality measures then attribute to the 5-star instead of the current quality measures. So keep that in mind. Whatever your quality measures are now, your April update to the quality measures will be representative of the full 4 quarters of 2023. So whatever your average for those 3 quality measures or all of those quality measures will be frozen in April and will attribute to your 5-star for, again, the first one, improvement in function, until October 2024, and the rest of them then until January of 2025. So that's important to remember as well. Again, thinking about the G to GG transition, we have an opportunity now to really pay attention and pay close attention to how we're coding GG and how that then will affect the quality measures that we'll be talking about here. Incidentally, the first quality measure there, the percent of residents who made improvement in function, as it changes over into a discharge function score, that will have a major impact beyond just the 5-star rating, quality reporting, and value-based purchasing. We'll talk about that here in a minute. So these 5 measures that we just mentioned, more specifically, CMS sent a memo out after the initial memo, sent another notification out through the email listserv to indicate something a little more specific here, in particular, the way that this will affect the iKeys reporting system. All right, the old CASP reports now have migrated over to iKeys, and you can download those in your iKeys. Again, the same types of reports and timeframes, the ability to look at specific timeframes related to the quality measures. These 5 measures were frozen in the iKeys MDS 3.0 facility level and resident level reports on October 1st, 2023. All right, so if you're downloading those reports and you're using time after October 1st, 2023, there will be some implications, and these are the implications here. Starting on the first Monday of November, iKeys will process any qualifying records submitted on or after October 1st that had a target date prior to October 1st in order to provide updated measure data based on newer submissions. And then the note that's important is that providers should be aware that the MDS records with a target date on or after October 1st will not be included in these impacted measures. And as a result, what will happen over time as we move further and further away from October 1st, because these 5 measures have been frozen, Eventually, that data will just be unusable for those 5 measures because the data won't be available after October 1st. All right. So as a result, the requested reports that include dates on or after October 1st would be expected to decrease in the numerator and denominator due to the MDS-G to GG transition. Now, one of the things that CMS has not told us is when these will unfreeze in relationship to the iKeys report. So more on that as time comes along, and as we hear more from CMS, we'll be able to know specifically. But for the time being, just know that's the impact that will happen to your iKeys reports. We'll talk a little bit about that here in a minute. We've got an example iKeys report. We'll point out some strategy on how to even use those even in the interim period of time. All right. The other point that we want to make in relationship to the changes to the version 1.1811 of the MDS is that there were 6 other items with label changes, just so that you're aware as you look through the quality measure user's guide. Percent of residents who newly received antipsychotic medications, who lose too much weight, who have depressive symptoms, receive antipsychotic medications, anti-anxiety hypnotic use, and percent of residents who use anti-anxiety hypnotic medications. All of those had number changes related to the MDS item set, just so that you're aware of that as well, but there wasn't any difference to the calculation. All right, let's jump into the quality measures here, and this will take up the rest of our time. Currently, the measures that we mentioned just a few minutes ago, the 5 measures, the first one, the percent of residents who made improvement in functions, that is CMS ID N037.03. And just a word about that, as you look at your iKeys reports and understand these ID numbers here, and these show up also in the 5-star or the quality measures users guide. That N037.03 is the number of the current quality measure. N037 and 0.03 means that's the 3rd version of that quality measure. That quality measure, and we talked about the freezing and the unfreezing for that particular quality measure as well. This measure will be replaced by the GG equivalent measure, discharge function score measure, and that's an entirely new and different measure, and you're going to see the differences here in just a minute. And that ID number is S042.01. You'll notice it changed from N to S. That's because it's changing from the legacy quality measure system essentially to the quality reporting system. All of the quality reporting measures for the quality reporting program begin with the letter S. All right, we'll talk about that. So the second measure then, percent of residents whose ability to move independently worsened, that's N035.03, is being replaced by another measure with the same name, but it's now N35.04. So you'll see that N35 is going to have a 4th version. You're going to see the differences there as well. And then the percent of residents whose need for help with activities of daily living has increased. Percent of residents whose need for help with ADL. Let me go back to the second one there just a minute ago. And I did this in the presentation I did the other day. I jumped ahead of myself. This second bullet point here, the percentage of residents whose ability to move independently worsened is changing to the percent of residents whose ability to walk independently worsened. That's a typo there. And so we're going to talk about that's a big one that's changing radically, and we need to talk about that. The third one is the one that really isn't changing in terms of a name. The percent of residents whose need for help with ADL's activity of daily living has increased. NO28.02 is changing to NO28.03. The 3rd version has the same name. Percent of residents whose need for help with the daily activities has increased. It's just a G to GG transition. We'll see that in a minute. Then the 4th one is the percent of residents, high-risk residents with pressure ulcers, is NO15.03, is going to be replaced by a completely different measure, NO45.01, percent of residents with pressure ulcers. And so you'll see that's a radically different quality measure. And then the final one, which does not affect the 5-star rating, is the percentage of low-risk residents who lose control of their bowel and bladder. That's NO25.02. You can see that's changing to NO46.01. Percent of residents with new or worsened bowel or bladder incontinence. Again, a totally different quality measure. So one of the things that we provided for you in your handouts is this table, the G to G, GQM changes compare table. It's the only way that I could really pull together all of this information into a place that was easy to look at and easy to understand in terms of the differences, the main differences between the 2 quality measures, the current measure and the GG equivalent measure. So I hope you have a copy of that. I think it's a helpful resource. Certainly has been for me as we've been talking about it with our customers and working together through these changes and thinking about the implication. So what I'd like to do with the remainder of our time here is to go down through each of these quality measures and just point out highlights in relationship to the changes that have occurred. And you can see the differences between the current measure as it will be frozen in both the 5-star and in your IKEYS reports, and the equivalent measure that will take over at some point in the future then, as we said, for the first one here in October of 2024, and then the remaining quality measures in January of 2025. Right, so the first measure, again, as we've said, is the percent of residents who made improvement in function. That will be replaced by the discharge function score. Again, a completely different measure. Then I'll mention here, as we talk about this one, this is the one really that is the cross-setting measure that will be developed and has been developed out of the quality reporting program. The quality reporting program, as you may be aware, is a residual of the Impact Act, essentially a piece of legislation that is, bottom line, leveling the playing field across post-acute care, inpatient rehab facilities, home health, skilled nursing facilities, and LTACs. Eventually, we'll have the same quality reporting coming out of the various tools. If you were to download all of those tools now, the OASIS, the MDS, the IRFPI, and the LTAC tool, measurement tool, you would see very similar items, requirements to standardize these data element tools from the Impact Act for quality reporting purposes and ultimately for payment purposes as well. And so this GG equivalent measure discharge function score is something that will be tabulated and calculated for every one of the post-acute care settings as a way to standardize outcomes. So you want to keep in mind this particular measure is the outcome measure now. It will be the outcome measure that will be utilized to determine which setting has the best outcomes. It's a standardized measure. All of the information coming out of this can be tabulated out of the other tools from post-acute care as well. So currently, this quality measure is the percent of residents who made improvement in function. Essentially, what it does is it looks at transfer self-performance, locomotion on unit, and walking in corridor to determine from admission to discharge if there was an improvement in those three areas. Okay, there's a calculation that happens with that, but essentially, the more people you can have improve in these areas shows that they're better able to transition to a lower level of care. Essentially, it's a measure that is looking at the things that people need to be able to be proficient in when they then transfer to a lower level of care, go home or back to assisted living or whatever it happens to be. And this is all for short stay residents, basically your Medicare Part A population here, looking at these particular things and looking at whether there's an improvement in those three areas: locomotion on unit, self-performance, walk-in corridor self-performance, and transfer self-performance. That's basically what the current quality measure is doing. There are a few exclusions. We'll talk about those here in a second, but primarily that's what it's measuring. Notice the difference here. First of all, it's not a simple, did I improve in three areas anymore? Basically, what we're looking at here is the total number of Medicare Part A SNF stays. And you can see the qualifier there, type 1 stays only. That's a stay where there was an admission and discharge. The resident did not die during the facility stay. So that the total number of Medicare Part A stays in the denominator there, except for those that meet exclusion criteria, with an observed discharge function score that is equal to or greater than the calculated expected discharge function score. So it's a similar idea in that you want to see a score that improves over time, but essentially what happens is we're going to be looking at a calculated, a observed discharge function score, whatever the observed score was on that final discharge assessment, Part A PPS discharge assessment, that is equal to or greater than an expected discharge score. And let me just try to explain exactly what that's going to be. First of all, you're going to see here that the items on the MDS that are being measured, GG0130 and GG0170, are vastly different from what are being currently measured on the improvement in function score. Okay, it's not just transfers, locomotion, and walking anymore. It's eating, oral hygiene, toileting hygiene, rolling left to right, lying to sitting on the side of the bed, sit to stand, chair, bed to chair transfer, toilet transfer, and then some walking items depending on how that resident's able to walk. All right. And so there'll be a total of 10 items that will be utilized here, not just the 3. And essentially what will happen is it will take that discharge function score calculated from each one of these, add that together, sum those up. That is your observed discharge function score. And then that is then adjusted by several covariates. And so as we move down through this particular quality measure, first of all, there are some exclusions from the denominator. If you meet any one of these exclusion criteria, then you're excluded from the sample altogether. If you're not in the denominator, then you're not in the numerator either. So these exclusions apply. You can see here comatose on the current measure, life expectancy less than 6 months, hospice, the transfer data or the ADL data that's necessary to calculate it is missing. Resident has no impairments at all. They're excluded. Resident has an unplanned discharge. You can see the calculation for exclusions here is similar. The Part A stay is an incomplete stay. That means the resident was discharged, was unplanned discharge, or died during the SNF stay. That's not a type 1 stay, as we mentioned just a minute ago. And then any of the following conditions: coma, persistent vegetative state, complete tetraplegia, severe brain damage, locked-in syndrome, severe anoptic brain damage, cerebral edema, or compression of the brain, similar to sort of the life expectancy, comatose, hospice types of issues here. But those kinds of things are excluded because those residents would not be able to improve. The resident is younger than 18 years of age. The resident is discharged or received hospice while a resident. So discharged to hospice or received hospice. And the resident did not receive any physical or occupational therapy services at the time of admission. So on the 5-day assessment, those are the exclusions comparisons. And then we have covariates. And the covariates, just so that you're aware, are conditions that are true, something that's true about the resident that makes it more likely that the resident could do better or worse, depending on what the covariate is looking at on that particular quality measure. So basically, as we look at the covariates for the current measure, it's age, gender, severe cognitive impairment, and some ADL coding calculations that come from a specific calculation for that particular measure. When we get to the new measure, you're going to notice here there's a whole list of 22 covariates ranging from age group, prior functionings, pressure ulcers, cognitive abilities, incontinence, falls, nutritional approaches, high and low BMI, all sorts of things that can have a positive or negative impact on that discharge function score. So when we get up here to the discharge function score that we looked at just a minute ago, whatever that is, it will take into account these covariates, these 22 covariates, and it will come up with an expected discharge function score based on what's true about the resident in this covariate list. And the observed discharge function score that we get from these items out of section GG will have to be better than what that expected discharge score was in order for us to flag positively on this discharge function score. Again, a higher number here means we had more patients that improved from admission to discharge. Same idea, but certainly using a lot of different information out of the MDS. And so again, back to the accuracy of section GG. Again, this item is the outcomes item. It is the standardized item now that is measuring outcomes in section GG. And I'm sure that we'll see more and more of this measure being utilized from hospital systems and insurance companies and other kinds of things, entities to compare facilities in terms of the outcomes they're able to achieve. And so again, section GG, so important that we code that appropriately in order to affect the quality of the outcomes of the residents that we're seeing, but then also looking at the other items in this covariate situation here. All of these items on the MDS have to be accurate in order for that expected discharge function score to be accurate so we can compare that observed score to the calculated expected score. So again, section GG so important, the entirety of the MDS so important to make sure that we're getting this correct. And I don't want to fail to mention this again because I think this is so important, is that this particular quality measure is going to be a quality measure that will affect all of the areas for quality measurement that CMS has put in place relative to measuring quality in the facilities in long-term care. It will affect our IKEYS report. That report is used for internal quality measurement. It's also used by the surveyors pre-survey to develop perhaps some of their sample to sort of determine areas they need to focus in on when they come to the facility. It will be on that form. It will replace percent of residents who made improvement in function, as we said, at some point in the future here. It will also be part of the 5-star rating system, as we said before, all right? It will also be and has been added to the quality reporting program, and it also will affect your ability to gain back the full 2% of your value-based purchasing adjustment at some point in the next couple of years. And a whole nother conversation on value-based purchasing, and perhaps we'll have that conversation with you all at some point in the future as well. But this is something that we have to pay attention to. Outcomes, quality, value-based purchasing, value-based purchasing is what CMS is pressing us into as it comes to these changes now from G to GG. All right, let's move on to the second quality measure here, and that is the percent of residents whose ability to move independently worsened. Notice that this is now the percent of residents whose ability to walk independently worsened, and I want you to take that in. This is a significant change in relationship to the quality measure shift from G to GG. It was mentioned at the outset today as the folks at QSource were talking about some of the things that I've been involved with. I have the privilege currently of being able to write an article for McKnight's once a month, sometimes twice a month, but usually once a month. It's called MDS Intelligence, and usually it comes out right around the first part of the month or so. The last one that I wrote actually came out the last part of November. It was my December article, and it was specifically on these changes and some of the things that I believe CMS needs to go back and rethink in relationship to how these new GG equivalent measures have materialized relative to what they used to measure. And this is one of those that I think CMS needs to rethink in relationship to that. Notice here that the current measure, NO 35.03, it reports the percentage of long-stay residents who experience a decline in independence of locomotion on the unit during the target period. All right. The measure description in the current version 16 of the Quality Measure Manual reads exactly the same. However, as I mentioned before, it's looking at those who've lost the ability to walk, not those who have lost the ability to move independently, or that independently has worsened. Let's look at that here quickly. The one item on the MDS that the current measure actually measures is locomotion on unit self-performance, okay? Locomotion on unit. And if you go back to the MDS 3.0, the old MDS 3.0 that we had, version 1.17.2, that was an MDS that was focused for the most part in the quality measure system on section G. And if you went to section G and you looked at what was the definition of locomotion on unit, just want to look at that real quickly here with you so that you can remember if you've forgotten exactly what that definition actually said. Locomotion on unit is how the resident moves between locations in his or her room and adjacent corridor on the same floor, and if in the wheelchair, self-sufficiency once in the chair. Right, so you're probably already thinking in your head, man, that's a big difference here, because look at what we're recording on the new one. It records long-stay residents with a selected target assessment and at least one qualifying prior assessment who have had a decline in, says locomotion when compared to the target assessment, but what we're looking at now is GG0170I. GG0170I is not locomotion on the unit, it's walking 10 feet, all right? Walking 10 feet. And so what this is recording is a decrease of 1 or more points on the walk 10 feet item between the target assessment and the prior assessment. So before we were looking at locomotion, which included walking and wheelchair mobility. Now we're only looking at walking. I believe this is a bit short-sighted from CMS's perspective. I've made that comment on the Open Door Forum. I wrote the article in McKnight's, and incidentally, apparently CMS reads McKnight's. And so I got an email back from one of the policymakers at CMS indicating that they enjoyed reading my article, but it was very thought-provoking and helpful. So perhaps we'll start a conversation with CMS around perhaps revamping these. I think they could include other items in this one that would help us evaluate wheelchair mobility as well. Think about the residents that we're excluding from this quality measure now, all those residents that use wheelchairs. Now in our quality measure development, we're not able to see or have a window into the decline in those residents that have wheelchair mobility issues. All right, well, that's a piece of important information because a large portion of our residents in our facilities use wheelchairs for locomotion. So I hope that CMS begins to think or will have some further thoughts on this in relationship to maybe addressing that within the quality measurement system or adding a quality measure that might give us that ability to see that. So that's the big difference between these two. Locomotion versus walking is something we're going to have to get used to. And again, we're not looking at section G anymore, which was the rule of 3. We're looking at walking 10 feet, usual functioning, usual performance. Again, back to that accuracy piece and understanding, having your staff being able to code this information appropriately and evaluate it appropriately to get that appropriate code. Notice here also that we have essentially the same exclusions. I'm not going to go through those. Basically the same covariates as well, or items that would make it more likely that the resident would trigger for this particular quality measure. All right, let's move on then to the next one. And that is the percent of residents whose need for help with ADLs or activities of daily living has increased. Again, the same exact measure that we're going to be measuring in section GG, but goodness gracious, the items we're going to be measuring are a whole lot different. And I want to point out a couple of things here, and I spent some time in my article talking about this one in particular, the walking one and this one in particular, and the differences and some conversation that needs to happen here. Notice here, the 4 late loss ADLs were what we were measuring. So basically, the way these measure works from assessment, again, it's measuring from one assessment to the next, and it's saying in the late loss ADLs, as we knew them to be in section G, bed mobility, transfer, toilet use, and eating, in any one of those, did they get more dependent by 2 points, or in any 2 of those, did they get more dependent by 1 point? If either of those cases occurred, then you trigger for this quality measure. And that's basically the way the new quality measure is going to be to calculate as well. But notice the items that we're going to be measuring. The 4 late loss ADLs that we were measuring in section G, bed mobility, a transfer, toilet use, and eating. Now we're going to be measuring sit to lying, sit to stand, eating, and toilet transfer. Right now, let me just point out a couple of main differences here for those of you that aren't spending a lot of time with the MDS to understand the differences here. We have a couple of items here, and what they've attempted to do is to come across into GG and make these items equivalent, but they are not equivalent. Think about the idea of transfer, all right? In the new G construct, what they're saying they're accommodating transfer for from the old section G is sit to stand. All right, and if you were to go back to section G on the old MDS, you would see that the section G item for transfer says how the resident moves between surfaces, including to and from the bed, chair, wheelchair, standing position. So this sit to stand is only one small element out of the old transfer item. Same thing for sit to lying. That's supposed to accommodate bed mobility, but remember the definition for bed mobility. How the resident moves to and from a lying position, turns side to side, positions body while in bed, or alternate sleep furniture. None of that is accommodated by just the sit to lying piece. All right, eating, think about the differences there. The old definition for eating, how the resident eats and drinks regardless of skill, do not include eating or drinking during medication pass, but it includes intake of nourishment by other means like tube feeding, TPN, IV fluids administered for nutrition and hydration. The eating definition for section GG doesn't include most of that. It's only how you're able to take food to your mouth and swallow that food. It doesn't account for TPN, IVs. It doesn't account for tube feedings. It's totally different in terms of measuring that eating capacity. And then toileting transfer. When you look at the definition of toileting, toilet use from the old section G, it was how the resident uses the toilet room, commode, bedpan, or urinal, transfers on and off the toilet, cleanses self after elimination, changes pad, manages ostomy or catheter, adjusts clothes. We would not include certain things like emptying the bedpan, urinal, bedside commode, catheter bag, or ostomy bag. Toilet transfer is only one small piece of that. And so the conversation, I believe, continues to need to happen with CMS to add more things to this, to give us a more full-on approach. If you think about the items that are used to calculate the GG function score for PDPM are a whole lot more accommodating for what these items in Section G used to calculate versus what this limited subset of items now that they're going to use in this quality measure will do. So I wanted to point that out again. Accuracy is so important, but just know when this quality measure starts to report, it's going to report a lot less than what it used to report when we were reporting for Section GG. And that doesn't mean we need to look at the quality associated with all of those other issues. It just means in that quality measure, it's not going to pull over all of the things that we were used to seeing in that quality measure. The calculation is essentially the same. The exclusions are essentially the same. So I'm not going to go through that again, and there are no covariates associated with this particular quality measure. All right, let's move on to the percent of high-risk residents with pressure ulcers. The high-risk residents with pressure ulcers now will just be the percent of residents with pressure ulcers, and I pointed out a minute ago, it's a completely different quality measure. And I'm going to say at the outset here, before I talk about these last two, that these last two I think are actually better measures than what we had under Section G. I don't say that all that often, but I think that it is the case here. I'll try to make that case as we talk about these two. The current quality measure essentially measures residents that have a stage 2 to 4 pressure ulcer or unstageable pressure ulcer that are considered to be high risk. And that high risk adjustment, stratification adjustment inside the denominator, it's only those patients that are impaired with their bed mobility, that are comatose or have malnutrition or are at risk for malnutrition. Okay. That is the high-risk subpopulation that are be dealing with here. In the new quality measure, there is no stratification, and so it's all residents that will be indicated on a current quality on a current MDS or the target MDS that indicates a stage 2 to 4 or unstageable pressure ulcer is present on that particular assessment. All right, so that's really important to understand. No longer is this stratified into high risk. It's all residents that have a pressure ulcer that will be recorded stage 2 to 4 unstageable pressure ulcer on that particular assessment. All right, and the exclusions are essentially the same. The big difference between these, of course, is the stratification. No high-risk stratification in the actual denominator, those residents that will be included in the sample. But the covariate list, or the list of items that are true about the resident that make it more likely that the resident would actually have a pressure ulcer, that is what's different about this quality measure now. So no risk adjustment in the front end for the denominator, but on the back end, once you have all of that clinical characteristic developed in the MDS, then that facility recorded number, the number of patients that actually have a stage 2 to 4 pressure ulcer in the denominator, will be adjusted to make it more equal to the to a normal facility or to the rest of the facilities in the country, based on the covariates that resident has or the issues that make it more likely that they would actually get a stage 2 to 4 pressure ulcer or unstageable pressure ulcer. Once again, I think this is a better way to evaluate the facility in terms of developing stage 2 to 4 pressure ulcers and how we are working in a quality improvement environment to not only mitigate the risk factors, but to help residents to accommodate and heal from those pressure ulcers as well. So basically, the sample will be adjusted based on the covariates. You can see the covariates there again, impaired functional mobility. That's similar to the exclusions or the risk stratifications we saw in the old measure that made somebody high risk. Bowel incontinence, diabetes mellitus, peripheral vascular disease, peripheral arterial disease, low body mass index, malnutrition or risk for malnutrition. There's that again that we saw before, dehydrated on the target assessment, infections, septicemia, pneumonia, urinary tract infection, or multi-drug resistant organism on the target assessment, and then moisture-associated skin damage. All of these, if they are true, and then hospice care on the target assessment. It's on the next page here. Also, are covariates that would make it more likely, if these are true about the resident, then that number that we get, that fraction, that percentage that we get with the numerator and denominator here, will be adjusted to make it show more comparably and more equitably, if you will, to the rest of the nation in relationship to the residents that we have, because they have more comorbid conditions perhaps than a normal facility. All right, so this is the new measure that we'll be functioning under here. And once again, when we get down to the covariates here, prior to the current measure looked at impaired mobility and transfer, and I went through those definitions a few minutes ago. Here we're going to be looking at impaired functional ability, lying to sitting on the side of the bed. Again, a very limited subset of information, lying to sitting on the side of the bed. That does not encompass the entire bed mobility issue, and it doesn't encompass the transfer issue either. So it's very important to understand the limitations here in the covariates. But as we look at information that's going to impact the final score, we need to make sure that we're coding this lying to sitting on the side of the bed appropriately in section GG, and we're getting an accurate usual performance score there as well. All right, and then finally we have the final measure that does not affect the quality measures. This is the one that is still on the IKEYS report and still could be something that could affect your survey preparedness and so forth. This is the percentage of low-risk residents who lose control of their bowel and bladder. That's the current one that we're functioning under. The measure that will, the equivalent measure from GG that will replace that is the percent of residents with new or worsened bowel or bladder incontinence, a much different quality measure than the current quality measure that we have. So the way that the current quality measure works is it's only looking at residents in the facility who are considered to be low risk. Again, similar to the high risk issue we saw with the pressure ulcers. Now we're only looking at low risk residents who lose control of their bowel and bladder. All right. And the way that that's determined is there's a set of exclusions here. And when we get down to the set of exclusions, we see here that residents who have any of the following high risk conditions are excluded from the sample, which means the remaining sample are the low risk residents. All right. So in the current quality measure, severe cognitive impairment, total dependent in bed mobility, total dependent in transfer, total dependent in locomotion on the unit, all self-performance scores. Okay, those are the items that make you high risk. Anyone else is considered low risk, and that's the people that are in the denominator here. Okay. All right. In the new measure, we're not just looking at percent of residents of long-stay residents who frequently lose control of their bowel and bladder. Now we're looking at the percent of long-stay residents who are new or worsened bowel and bladder incontinence between the prior assessment and the target assessment. Again, a completely different way to look at incontinence, but I think a better way to look at incontinence in the facility from assessment to assessment ongoing. Okay. And in this case, what they have done is they've set up a set of criteria to determine residents who have worsened in their bowel with new or worsened bowel and bladder incontinence. And there are 4 conditions here that put you into that sample. Okay. Condition A is a new case of bowel incontinence, and I'm not going to go through the items on the MDIS and how they're coded. Just know a new case of bowel incontinence, a worst case of bowel incontinence, looking at the items in section HO 400, and then condition C would be a new case of bladder incontinence, and a new case or a worsened case of bladder incontinence, again at HO 300. So looking specifically at bowel and bladder incontinence, again, looking specifically from one assessment to the next to see if there has been a condition met where they are newly incontinent or whether they are have worsened in their continence. It's going to put a spotlight on the incontinence issue, and I just want to make sure that you are aware of that. That has been something that's sort of not been spotlighted recently in the current measure, and I think this will bring to light incontinence issues in the facilities in a way that it hasn't happened before, and might actually shine the light for the surveyors to see more about what's going on in the facility related to the incontinence issues. There are a list of exclusions here, and I'll leave you to look at that yourself, but those would take you out of the sample. For example, the target assessment is a 5-day assessment. Of course, we wouldn't have control over the incontinence on that particular assessment. Missing data, comatose, indwelling catheter, ostomy, no data available, those kinds of things. Now, the way this will be risk adjusted here, again, similar to the pressure ulcer, is there are covariates that will make it more likely that a resident would have one of these conditions that we looked at here, condition A, B, C, or D related to bowel and bladder incontinence, new or worsening, that would sort of level the playing field as we get compared to the rest of the facilities in the nation. Severe cognitive impairment, that would make it more likely that the resident couldn't follow a bowel and bladder retraining program, right? Sit to lying on the prior assessment, right? These transfer issues, bed mobility issues make it more difficult. Sit to stand, right? So those items, again, not just from the incontinence issues, but then the covariate issues here with section GG coming into play, sit to lying, lying to sitting, sit to lying, and sit to stand. Essentially looking at bed mobility and transfer, those people that have challenges with those would make it more likely that they would have incontinence issues. All right, those are the quality measures. The 5 quality measures. Again, the first 4 affecting your 5-star, and the last one affecting your IKEYS report and potential survey issues. So one of the things I want to finish up with here, and I know we're really close to time, and that is just so that you're aware of what your IKEYS report looks like currently, and essentially how it's going to look once you actually get this. I'm going to blow this up a little bit so you can see a little bit better here. Whoops. Let me make that just a little bit bigger here. This is a current IKEYS report. I'm sure you've seen this. Looks very similar to the one that used to come out of KEYS. Well, what I've done on here is just put a couple of highlights and some things for you to pay attention to, and I think it'd be worth your time to do this when you're looking at your current IKEYS reports, just to have in front of you a report that shows you what's getting ready to change. I've highlighted the 5 quality measures that are getting ready to change, and you'll notice that I've also put a star next to the quality measures that affect the 5-star rating. That's a good practice anyway as you're looking at this report to understand the 5-star, and as those change more in real time. Then when you get your update to your 5-star user, to your 5-star every quarter, again, the next one will be January. But understanding that within this quality measure perspective is important. So as you go down through this in your current report reviews, it would be helpful, I think, to know the 5 that are getting ready to change. And as you look down through those, that handout that I provided for you, to be able to look at what these quality measures are going to look like, and still be able in your facilities, even though you have current numbers to show the quality measure actual data, just know that those are going to be areas of focus and things that you'll need to pay attention to as you work through your QAPI and your quality improvement programs, performance improvement plans, and so forth, as you get to the time when we'll actually start seeing the numbers on here. You still have the opportunity to know these are changing, and the handouts show you the quality measures and the technical specifications to be able to accommodate those, so that when they do start showing up, you'll have good numbers in relationship to how those that data will be reported. All right, let's see. I think that's it.
So just want to thank Joel. Wonderful presentation. Always amazing. Love to watch you speak. But thank you all for attending this Culture of Safety Center webinar. As a reminder, you're going to receive a feedback evaluation and post-test in the email that you provided at registration at the end of today or tomorrow. We ask that you complete the evaluation and post-test, and upon receipt that you've completed that, we will send out the CEU certificate. And for the administrators today, we will provide information to the NAB registry on your behalf. And we just want to say thank you for joining us. And yes, this slide, connect with us as well. Facebook, Twitter, or X, whatever they call it nowadays, Indeed, and then of course our podcasts. Thank you so much.